Excited by this one today. So joining us all the way over from New York is Akash, co-founder or founder of Octane, who I'm sure will give us a bit more detail on that in a few minutes. Today, it's more about real-time margin analytics on your Kubernetes infrastructure. So we're going to hear about how a software as a service business that's got multiple customers running on its clusters can actually get the real-time margin of each customer by combining Stripe revenue data and cloud costs. So something that Akash has got a lot to say on the subject and somewhat of an expert. So I won't spoil your moment, Akash. Do you want to give an intro and let everybody know who you are and what you're all about?
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, Joe, I really appreciate you having me. So just to get right into it, right? We started Octane, and in the meat of it, what we're building is the world's first cloud native billing infrastructure. And we're enabling companies of all different sizes. The full gambit from helping customers get real-time cloud costs on Kubernetes to I'll show you a little bit of a teaser of what we're going to be launching soon, but also enabling different financial capabilities such as real-time margin analytics. So being able to look at your actual revenue data and overlay that with cloud cost data, and being able to actually bill your customers based on usage. So Octane is really the whole end-to-end experience, and through it, it's the world's first truly cloud native billing infrastructure.
Excellent. Okay, great. So you just said there, obviously you'll show us a bit of a demo of what's to come. I know you've got virtual KubeCon next week over there in the States. So I'm sure you're looking forward to that as well. We can talk a bit about that if anybody's got any questions on there. But I wanted to just start off with a quick question, if you don't mind, before we go straight into it and you give us your demo. For anyone that hasn't seen it, definitely check out Akash's LinkedIn profile. You get a real good feel for his background there. You're obviously a Kubernetes technical guy first and foremost, right? So this idea for Octane is obviously built up over time, but where did it come from?
Yeah. So, I guess the best way to talk through how Octane came to form, we should really talk about the entire journey, right? And we look at I'm assuming, almost everyone on this call or anyone watching at home, they've had their own cloud journey, right? And it's different for some people, but more or less it's pretty consistent, right? I mean, if we look at a couple of years ago, anyone that had their cloud engineering job, what they were doing is they had their Azure console, they had their AWS console. They're just creating virtual machines, setting up networking, setting up storage, pretty standard stuff. Then, infrastructure as code came in. There's automation. Managers are saying, okay, we want everything to be automated. This is what the new frontier is. So that was my experience several years ago. And then we actually started to see these shifts, these actually major shifts. The one big one being containerization, right? I think it was roughly in 2017. I was at another big corporate job, pretty much helping build a container platform, a containerized platform, right? And I think it was in roughly 2017, we saw this like massive shift towards everyone running containerized workloads, right? And it was at that point where I got into Kubernetes consulting. I started my own Kubernetes consulting business. And what we were seeing was everyone and anyone was building a Kubernetes-based platform, right? Be it a popular mobile app company, be it a well-established financial institution, be it a SaaS company, right? Everyone was building on top of Kubernetes. And we're here now in 2020, and it's a pretty well understood bit. One of the really interesting things in 2019 at KubeCon, as KubeCon comes, as we hit virtual KubeCon coming up soon, one of the big things that I noticed was that we looked at a lot of the KubeCon booths, and a lot of the companies, they were really pushing on the forefront of security, on the forefront of networking, on the forefront of compute. But what we did not see were companies innovating for the business, right? We didn't really see any help towards CFOs. We didn't see any help towards CEOs. Where was the connection between the business and the infrastructure, right? And that was really a lot of inspiration that drove what we're doing at Octane. To fast forward to even more recently, the pandemic, right? Globally, it's impacted all of us. It turned a lot of, for IT companies or IT groups, cost as one of the biggest challenges to tackle, right? Being, when the pandemic hit, it was, unfortunately, cutting down personnel, reducing your infrastructure budgets, really any form of cost cutting that was possible, right? Because for a lot of companies, revenues were down 80%, 70%. So that actually is where Octane was born, in solving for cost related. So solving for cost on Kubernetes. That's where Octane was born. And what we saw was that, well, everyone's building these massive platforms on Kubernetes, right? Highly containerized, multi-tenant environments. We have, you could have 10, 20, 100 customers on a single shared Kubernetes cluster. You could have 10, 20, 100 teams for a large enterprise on a shared Kubernetes cluster. But how do you map that back to constantly fluctuating costs, right? How do you map that back to one team or one customer that's consuming way more resources than another team, right? Because at the end of the day, you look at a cloud provider bill, and it's just a few line items, cost of virtual machines, cost of storage, cost of networking. So the first bit of what I'd love to show all of you is around how through Octane, we've enabled better cloud cost visibility on Kubernetes. Great. Yeah, so, again, going back, as we look at the cloud journey, right? Everyone's running production workloads, or a large percentage of enterprises are now running production level workloads on Kubernetes, and cloud cost is one of the more critical items that a lot of these companies are dealing with right now. So what we've seen a pretty significant need, and we're working with companies that have cost related problems on Kubernetes, and here's what we built. So being able to translate the usage of Kubernetes to actual attributed cloud cost is an essential, is important to actually being able to determine how to start cutting your bill, start understanding how your teams are spending. So what traditionally was just mainly machine costs, right? If you look at a typical AWS bill for Kubernetes, you're going to see these higher level components, right? We're going to see machine cost, right? So here we have, this is just a demo GKE cluster, running 2 nodes, the types, the zones, is it spot or not, the cost. We're also looking at storage and networking, and I'll talk a little bit briefly about networking because it's its own can of worms. But also, if you look at a cloud provider bill, you're not going to get the granularity of, well, what is my cost per namespace? So we have a little as a service e-commerce store. So we have an electronics store, a sock shop. These are both different namespaces on a shared cluster, right? And they have different pods. They have different, usage. So how do we attribute cost in a shared environment to different teams, right? Which is why it's important that you can attribute your cost to Kubernetes concepts. So what we've done is we've actually set up cost breakdowns at a Kubernetes granularity. So cluster, namespace, application, and pod, right? And we can see these different different breakdowns. We can look at these costs over different verticals. So be it storage or networking, machine, compute. And one of the more interesting costs that we've seen a lot of companies had issues with were purely around networking costs. Now, the reason they've had a lot of companies have issues with it because it's a bit of the wild, wild west, right? You have this shared Kubernetes cluster with nodes and pods. You know, these nodes could be in different availability zones. These pods could be talking to different, they could be talking outbound. They could be talking internally. The way your data moves it's very it could be very complicated depending on your architecture. And what makes it more complicated is cloud providers, they have their own each data transfer type would actually incur a different cloud cost. So intra-zone versus inter-zone. So if we're talking about zone to zone data transfer versus region to region data transfer versus within the same zone versus out of the cloud provider, all of those costs are different. So being able to really break down your networking cost across your different workloads is a really important challenge that we're happy to help companies solve. So yeah, I'll take a second to stop there, and if anyone's got any questions or thoughts.
Hi, I suppose I can ask you a question. I have a pet project. It's a bit of a hobby thing, and we do run cluster on DigitalOcean. Do you support DigitalOcean for this?
Currently, unfortunately, we do not. Currently, we support AWS, Azure, and GCP. So if you're running that pet project on any of those cloud providers, we'd be able to help you.
Okay, thanks.
So yeah, I mean, so this is the breakdown. You can look at CPU, memory, network, storage here. So yeah, so that's the little piece about cost.
So I guess what I'd want to ask you in terms of what you just showed us there, and Octane has been formed March, April this year.
Sorry.
The company formation.
Yeah,
so
March, April? This is it's been we built Octane to address like real needs produced through the pandemic. So yeah, this is a product we've been building this year. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously, right at for us over in the UK, right at the heart of when everything was sort of height of COVID. So how's business been for you? Have you had much traction on this so far?
Yeah, no, we've had a lot of traction. It's been a pretty awesome experience, and we see that there's no one size that fits all, right? Different companies have different needs. Like for example, if anyone watching, they're running machine learning workloads, right? The cost considerations of running machine learning workloads can be very different than just running a full stack e-commerce site, right? When we're talking about machine learning, it's GPU heavy. There's a lot of data transfer that you need to deal with, right? You need to know on a per model basis what your costs look like, and you need to be able to break down by that. But if you're running an e-commerce site, those are completely different. Those could be completely different considerations, and yeah, it's just really interesting to see how different customers that we work with, they have very different cost considerations, right? Especially when we look at a pretty standardized framework such as Kubernetes.
Yeah, cost is always something that comes up in conversations that I have with kind of senior leaders in companies that are adopting Kubernetes. It's all of the rage to adopt Kubernetes, right? And then to implement it and to utilize it because it's like the new buzzword, like DevOps was. But it's the cost. I think the best thing for me about it is when you link the C-suite down to the guys that are actually on the ground using this and trying to implement new features and utilize the best of the cloud services, actually reporting back, and then the C-suite guys can say, okay, we understand the need and versus the cost.
Yeah, and I'm excited to show you why I assume a lot of people have even joined this call, which is the piece on margin analytics, and another secret feature which I'm excited to talk about too, which is usage-based billing. But yeah, I mean, I distinctly remember in a few of my consulting engagements as a Kubernetes consultant that it was a very frustrating experience for example, a CFO to not have any deep infrastructure visibility, right? To the extent that's valuable to the CFO. So, yeah, I mean, we just have this growing cost, right? The head of DevOps says, okay, we got to put this on Kubernetes. The DevOps engineer says, okay, let's put it on Kubernetes. Now it's in Kubernetes in production. This is a really complicated workflow. A bunch of pods are talking to each other. We don't know what's going on, but it's in production. I did my job. And then the CFO is like, this bill is ridiculous. Excuse me, Mr. Head of DevOps. Why is this bill ridiculous? And the head of DevOps is like, I have no idea. Here's the bill. And I can't tell you anything because this is the bill. It has nothing to do with our pods. There's no references. So everyone's kind of in this weird, state. The DevOps engineer builds it. The head of DevOps says, okay, this is how you need to build it. And then the CFO is like, oh, that's the bill? Yikes.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. All right. Do you want to just jump to that video then?
Yeah, sure. So just a little bit of like pre-qualifying here. As I had mentioned before, ultimately everyone's building a platform, right? It's just anyone that's building an as a service company, anyone that's building even internal, like large firms, they have internal platforms to consume different, for example, database as a service teams, machine learning platform teams. Large companies are doing it. If you've ever interacted with the software as a service, you're consuming a platform, and the de facto method of consuming a platform today is Kubernetes. So what I'm about to show you is actually catered towards software as a service companies that are running on Kubernetes. Now, I think it was Romans that mentioned he's experimenting with a tool on DigitalOcean. Well, if, for example, he was experimenting with this new cool open source database and he wants to start charging end customers on that experience, well, what does that look like? So I have a database. I built a database. I want to offer a managed database solution. Roman, hopefully you don't mind I'm calling you out here, but Roman's going to say, okay, how do I even charge my end customer? Well, for me to actually charge my end customer, I need to, I probably should be charging based on usage, right? I should probably be charging on some metric, let's say storage or vCPUs, right? And okay, great. Now I'm charging my end customer. I probably should know how much that costs per customer. I should make sure that my cost per customer is not more than, than how much I'm billing. So what I'm about to show you here is actually really catered to developers that are building these new developer tools on Kubernetes and how to really make a sellable business right out the gate. So I'm going to go ahead and...
Akash, can I just, I think you were hitting a nail on the head there, because I'm not building a database, but we're building a software application which allows you to create your own application. So more like low code application designer online.
Low code. Okay. So low code.
The capability of running that application in the cloud. So for non-technical people, you just, build it like Excel, you deploy it, and then it runs. We need to know how much each pod costs us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And there are some people who host it for free. There are some people who pay monthly cost for a slightly larger resource allocation. But it's really important for us to actually understand where the costs are coming from.
And here's another piece of it. What, in terms of this software you're about to sell, how do you plan to, like, what would your pricing model look like in a very rough sense? Would it be based on usage?
It was $5 a month.
Okay, so it's like on some monthly based
Yeah,
measurement.
but
Okay.
wasn't cost based.
Okay, so I guess what I'm gonna walk you through in just a moment. I won't keep rambling. I'll get right into it. You know, there's a lot of Romans out there building developer tools, and it's important, right? If you're going to consume any developer tool, that you'd want to be able to use it on a pay-as-you-go basis. The same way you consume AWS, a virtual machine, you want to use it as you want to pay as you go. So I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you what we built here, right? So what we've done is pull this right here. So we're actually pulling in a bunch of relevant Kubernetes metrics. So this is interfacing directly with, for example, kubestate metrics, the kubestate metrics API, and we're pulling from your multi-tenant cluster. So if you built, let's say, a developer tool, let's say an open source database, and you want to charge your end customer based on, let's just say, for example, like capacity CPU cores, right? You can say, okay, I want to charge based on CPU cores. And so, for example, here I already have 2 pre-built meter formulas where I can say, okay, I want to charge based on your real-time consumptions of CPU on a time-based multiplier. I'm going to apply a certain price rate to that consumption. And ultimately, I'm going to bill on it. Right now, what happens with Octane in the back end is your data developers tool, let's call it, right now we're using an e-commerce store, let's call it electronic store, is actually a namespace. So we're grouping usage consumption on a namespace level and actually getting the total cost of it. And also what we're doing, which is really cool, is we are totaling the spend amount for your end customer for that team. So what we're doing is we're actually integrating that consumption, we're calculating how much that costs the end user, and we're actually integrating directly with Stripe so you can bill your end customer. So if I'm effectively Shopify and we have an electronic store that wants to use my SaaS solution, I have a price, which let's say it was like per vCPU consumption, and I can start billing on actual usage as well as get total cost.
Sorry to ask again. My quick question: have you got APIs to manage accounts from the custom software?
Yeah. So exactly, we do. So you can easily create new accounts. You can also, through the UI, if you wanted to, create an account. And for example, if we wanted to create a new customer, right? You can say, okay, so we have a new test customer, and we can filter by whatever grouping we want. So if you've architected your application on a namespace level, so each customer gets their own namespace,
yeah,
we can literally, through a simple drop down, say, okay, we're going to filter usage based on a namespace level, right? And we can, so this is free fly, but actually maybe let's do cube.
Would it still work fine if we have thousands of users?
Yeah. I mean, the question is.
So to answer Roman's question here, yes, we do have an API. In fact, we actually show it off in the Margin Analytics blog. It's just simple REST API that, yes, exactly. When your system goes ahead and creates a new user, the idea is that you would just make one request to Octane to register that user and identify the grouping with which to kind of aggregate the costs and the revenue.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
So as you can see here, based on some regex I defined, we can actually see like a breakdown of I think I did based on anything with Kubernetes. So we can actually see a breakdown of all the applications that have that. And you can actually group your usage based on that filter, right? So what's really cool now is if we go back to, let's see. So if we go back here, right, and I'll show you the Stripe piece too, which is really cool. So what we've now done is we've overlaid two different important data points, which matter a lot to any business running a software as a service, right? You want to see, okay, based on your customers, each individual customers, what is the real-time revenue and what is the real-time cost, right? And then I want to be able to say, okay, so this little box here shows me this is the money this is my margins, right? This is how much money I'm making. We're removing cost here, right? At one point, until it looks like around midnight yesterday, we were losing money. We had not enough business. We were pulling in. It was just a cost-based factor. But then we started to book business. We had our end customers consuming our software, so our revenues exceeded our costs. So we're now starting to see real-time margins, right? And we actually have some automation to actuate this experience in Stripe, right? Ultimately, Stripe is one of the most popular payment gateways that is used today. And what we want to do is be able to say, okay, you've used my database. This is your consumption of my developer tool. Now I'm going to invoice you at the end of the month. We have an invoice just coming in for demo purposes every 10 minutes. But as you can see here, we can see now a bill to teametelectronics.com for a certain amount due based on their real-time consumption of CPU and memory, right? And yeah, and then we're able to get like a nice visual of that entire experience.
I like that because it's kind of a way to show exactly up to the minute, like you said, like real-time margin analytics, right? So it shows you back to, right, we're using this much, we need to make a change now, rather than the cost getting far outstretched, and then you realize when it's too late, and then you need to make a substantial change to your infrastructure.
Exactly. I mean, what we see often is that you just have a few bad apples, right? You have a few customers that the financial equation doesn't make sense, right? Their costs, for whatever reason, are exceeding their revenue. Maybe you have someone that's on a free trial for too long. Maybe you have a customer that's just totally abusing one of the tiers of your price, one of your pricing tiers, right? So this is just like one example of, well, the usage and the infrastructure metrics are extremely important to a business, right? And what Octane has encapsulated is that full end-to-end financial experience being one, enabling an out-of-the-box way for people like Roman to just start billing immediately based on usage. Then two, actually internally view revenue and spend over time. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're moving to a world now where it's all software infrastructure. It's not physical stores, right? That's not your cost anymore. It's not, unfortunately, sometimes it's not even people, right? Sometimes the root of the cost of a business is truly the infrastructure. And you see that most predominantly in like true software as a service companies. So
okay, cool. So I mean, 2020 has been an interesting year for a lot of people, at least alone someone that's launched and started their own company in a year like this year. So what does 2021 look like for you and for Octane? What are your plans for next year?
Heads down, working really hard. That's all that's all you can do when you're literally locked down. I think we're going to see the most amazing innovation happening through 2021 because this is a period of building in a way, right? If we're thinking about software, this is a period where people are literally locked away. So it's an
Mm.
opportunity to build really creative and awesome things. And I think 2021, we're going to see a lot of really cool and interesting, innovative companies coming up. And yeah, we're building.
Handcuffs are off. Go at it.
Yeah, go at it. Yeah, I mean, just last thing, if you know, if anyone's interested or has challenges in the space, like, we'd love to chat. Definitely send me an email at Akash, AKASH at getoctane.io. You know, specific call it. I've called you out. Romans, I'd love to talk to you too. I mean, hear what you're building. It sounds really cool. So
Sure, I added you on LinkedIn.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well, yeah, so definitely reach out to me, anyone. I'd love to hear from you. Again, it's Akash, AKASH at getoctane.io.